For 8 weeks straight, Staff Sergeant Emma Walsh couldn't control the beast. The Barrett M82A1 50 caliber rifle kicked like a freight train against her shoulder, sending rounds sailing past targets at distances she used to dominate. Her breathing was perfect, her stance textbook, her calculations flawless. But every time she squeezed that trigger, the massive rifle seemed to rebel against her, as if the weapon itself knew she was carrying something she couldn't shoot away. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The other snipers had started calling her Shaky Walsh behind her back. Instructors pulled her aside with increasing frequency, their voices dropping to whispers that somehow felt louder than shouting. Her file grew thicker with performance. Reports that all said the same thing in different ways: technically sound, psychologically compromised, recommend remedial training. Then on the morning of her final qualification, when failure meant losing her sniper designation forever, Admiral James Blackwood stepped onto the range and did something that would haunt the instructors for years. He confiscated her Barrett 50 cal, the weapon she'd been fighting for 2 months, and placed it in the hands of the one person who'd been watching her struggle in complete silence. What happened in the next 30 seconds would leave the Admiral requiring reconstructive surgery on his dominant hand, shatter 3 range records simultaneously, and transform a broken sniper into a legend whose story would be whispered in military circles for decades. The California sun had been merciless for 6 straight days, turning the Mojave Desert training range into a furnace that tested human endurance as much as marksmanship skills. Staff Sergeant Emma Walsh stepped off the transport truck at Camp Pendleton's Advanced Marksmanship Training Facility, her desert combat boots hitting packed earth that radiated heat even through thick rubber soles. The air shimmered with thermals that would make precision shooting a nightmare for anyone not trained to read the invisible currents of superheated air, dancing above the range. Emma was 31 years old, but carried herself with the deliberate movements of someone who'd learned that speed could be the enemy of accuracy. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, so tight it seemed to stretch the freckles across her cheekbones, giving her face an intensity that made people look twice. She wore her desert utilities with the kind of perfect press that spoke of hours spent preparing for inspection. But her hands told a different story. They moved with the slight tremor of someone fighting an internal war, fingers that had once been steady as surgical instruments now betraying the chaos beneath her composed exterior. The Advanced Marksmanship Training Facility sprawled across 2,000 acres of California desert, its low-slung concrete buildings, designed to withstand both the punishing heat and the thunderous reports of 50 caliber rifles being fired at maximum range. The main complex consisted of a series of interconnected structures that looked more like an industrial warehouse than a military training ground. But Emma knew better. This was where the Marine Corps sent its most promising marksmen to become something more than ordinary soldiers. This was where careers were made or destroyed by the difference between hitting center mass and missing by an inch at distances, where an inch might as well be a mile. Building 47 housed the administrative offices, its interior a familiar maze of government-issue furniture and fluorescent lighting that turned everyone's complexion slightly green. The duty sergeant behind the reception desk wore the kind of bored expression that came from processing hundreds of Marines through the same routine, his eyes never leaving his computer screen as he slid a manila folder across the scarred wooden counter. 3rd floor, room 312. Initial briefing at 0600 tomorrow. Range qualification starts Monday. Don't waste everyone's time if you're not serious about this program. His voice carried the flat authority of someone who'd seen too many confident Marines wash out of the program to believe in anyone's potential, until they proved it with measurable results. "Roger that, Sergeant." Emma's response was crisp, professional. revealing nothing of the anxiety that had been building in her chest since she'd received orders to report to Camp Pendleton. She'd requested this assignment specifically, had pulled every string available to get a slot in the program. But now that she was here, the weight of expectation felt heavier than her full combat load. The barracks complex stretched across a quarter-mile of desert hardpan, low buildings connected by covered walkways that provided minimal relief from the sun's assault. Emma found herself assigned to Delta Company, 3rd floor, corner room with 2 other female Marines, who nodded politely but didn't immediately launch into the kind of conversation that created instant friendships. This wasn't basic training, where shared misery created bonds. This was advanced schooling where everyone was competing for the same limited number of slots, and friendships could wait until after the competition was decided. Emma unpacked her gear with the methodical precision that had become second nature during her 8 years in the Corps. Her sea bag contained the usual assortment of uniforms, personal items, and field equipment, but also something that made her different from most Marines arriving at advanced training programs. Tucked beneath her carefully folded utilities was a small wooden box containing 3 purple hearts, 2 bronze stars with V device, and a presidential unit citation that most Marines would never see in their entire careers. Her rifle case occupied the space beneath her rack, a hard-shell container that held her personally modified M40A6 sniper rifle along with the specialized optics and accessories that had made her one of the most effective designated marksmen in her previous unit. The weapon represented thousands of hours of training, hundreds of confirmed kills at distances exceeding 800 meters, and a level of expertise that should have guaranteed her success in any marksmanship program the Marine Corps could devise. But Emma knew something her instructors hadn't discovered yet. The same hands that had once been capable of hitting a target the size of a dinner plate at 1,200 meters now shook almost imperceptibly whenever she settled behind a rifle scope. The same eyes that had tracked enemy movement across vast expanses of Afghan countryside now saw shapes that weren't there, movements that existed only in memory. The same trigger finger that had saved American lives with precisely placed shots now hesitated at the moment of firing, second-guessing decisions that had once been as automatic as breathing. The mess hall buzzed with the usual dinner conversation of Marines comparing previous assignments, speculating about upcoming training, and establishing the subtle hierarchies that governed military social structures. Emma selected a table near the windows where she could observe the room while keeping her back to a solid wall, a habit formed during too many meals eaten in places where relaxing your guard could have permanent consequences. Her tray contained the standard military fare: overcooked vegetables, meat of questionable origin, bread that had seen better days, and coffee that could strip paint from vehicles. She ate methodically, focusing on nutrition rather than taste, listening to fragments of conversation from nearby tables while appearing to concentrate entirely on her meal. 2 tables away, a group of Marines from her barracks were discussing the legendary difficulty of the Barrett M82A1 qualification course. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The .50 caliber rifle was a beast that demanded respect. Its recoil capable of dislocating shoulders and its report loud enough to cause permanent hearing damage without proper protection. Most importantly, it was the weapon that separated true precision marksmen from ordinary shooters. Success with the Barrett .50 cal meant access to the kind of assignments that could define a military career. "That's the weapon that breaks more Marines than any other," said Corporal Jake Mitchell, a lanky Marine from Tennessee whose accent carried the slow confidence of someone accustomed to hunting in difficult terrain. "Saw 3 guys wash out last cycle just trying to qualify with that monster. Thing kicks like a mule and costs more per round than most people make in an hour." Specialist Amy Carter, A compact Marine with short black hair and the kind of intense gaze that suggested serious competition nodded in agreement. "My brother went through this program 2 years ago. Said the Barrett qualification was where dreams went to die. You've got to be perfect at distances where perfect isn't humanly possible. And you've got exactly 3 chances to prove you can handle the pressure." Emma continued eating, but her attention was completely focused on the conversation. The Barrett M82A1 represented the pinnacle of military marksmanship training, the weapon that would determine whether she could continue her career as a precision shooter or be reassigned to conventional infantry duties. More importantly, it was the test that would determine whether she could overcome the psychological barriers that had been growing stronger with each passing month since her return from her last deployment. Staff Sergeant David Brooks, a Marine with multiple deployment ribbons and the kind of weathered appearance that suggested extensive combat experience, leaned back in his chair and studied the room with eyes that missed nothing. "Word is they've got some heavy hitters in this cycle. That Marine in the corner," he nodded slightly toward Emma's location, "has more combat decorations than most officers. Probably thinks she's going to walk through this program without breaking a sweat." Emma's expression never changed, but she noted the attention and filed it away for future reference. In her experience, Marines who made assumptions about other Marines' capabilities based on decorations or reputation usually learned painful lessons about the difference between past performance and current ability. She finished her meal, cleared her tray, and walked toward the exit without acknowledging the curious glances that followed her movement. The rifle range stretched across 1,200 meters of desert that had been precisely surveyed and marked to provide the most challenging long-range shooting environment possible. Electronic targets at distances ranging from 400 to 1,200 meters could be raised, lowered, and moved laterally to simulate the kind of dynamic targeting scenarios that modern snipers encountered in combat situations. The range featured multiple firing positions carved into natural terrain features, concrete bunkers that provided stable shooting platforms, and observation towers where instructors could monitor every aspect of a student's performance. Emma arrived at the range 30 minutes before the scheduled training time, using the extra time to study the terrain and wind conditions that would affect her shooting throughout the program. The morning air was still cool, but heat waves were already beginning to form over the distant target positions, creating the kind of mirage effects that could make precision shooting nearly impossible for shooters who hadn't learned to read atmospheric conditions. Master Sergeant Rick Torres paced behind the firing line with the measured stride of someone who had spent years teaching Marines the difference between shooting and precision marksmanship. He was a compact man with graying hair and hands that showed the wear patterns of someone who had spent decades handling military weapons. His voice carried across the range with the kind of authority that made Marines pay attention without requiring him to raise his volume. "This is not a marksmanship course for beginners," Torres began, his eyes scanning the assembled Marines with the calculating gaze of someone evaluating potential. "You are here because your previous performance suggested you might have the capability to master precision shooting at distances where most Marines cannot even see their targets clearly. Some of you will discover that previous success does not guarantee future performance. Others will find capabilities they did not know they possessed." The Barrett M82A1 rifles were arranged on tables behind the firing line, their massive bulk making the standard M4 carbines look like toys by comparison. Each rifle weighed nearly 30 pounds and fired ammunition that cost more than $50 per round. The weapons represented the pinnacle of military small arms technology, capable of engaging targets at distances exceeding 2,000 meters and delivering enough kinetic energy to disable vehicles as well as enemy personnel. Emma approached her assigned rifle with the kind of respect that experienced shooters showed for weapons capable of serious injury if mishandled. The Barrett's operation was familiar from her previous training, but handling the actual weapon reminded her of the massive recoil forces that would be transmitted through her body with each shot. The rifle's bipod legs were adjustable for different shooting positions, and the muzzle brake was designed to redirect propellant gases in a way that reduced felt recoil, while creating a distinctive blast signature that announced the presence of a .50 caliber rifle from miles away. The first exercise was designed to familiarize students with the weapon's handling characteristics at relatively short range. 400 meters, single shots, no time pressure, every advantage possible. To help Marines develop confidence with the unfamiliar weapon system, Emma settled into her shooting position with practiced ease, adjusting the bipod height and rifle cant to achieve a natural point of aim that would require minimal muscular effort to maintain. Her breathing fell into the controlled pattern that had been drilled into her during years of sniper training. Inhale deeply, exhale halfway, hold, acquire sight picture, apply steady trigger pressure, follow through. The sequence had become as automatic as walking, a combination of physical and mental processes that should have resulted in consistent accuracy, regardless of external pressures or internal distractions. The Barrett's scope revealed a level of detail that was almost overwhelming. At 400 meters, she could see individual bolts on the target frames, could read the manufacturer's markings on the electronic target systems, could observe the slight movement of heat waves rising from the desert floor between her position and the target. The crosshairs settled naturally on the center of the target, and her finger found the trigger's breakpoint with familiar precision. But as she prepared to fire, something shifted in her peripheral vision. The target began to blur and change, its clean geometric lines becoming something else entirely. For a moment that lasted forever, she was no longer on a training range in California, but in a compound in Kandahar province, watching through a rifle scope as a figure moved between buildings, making decisions that would have consequences she was still trying to understand. The rifle fired without her conscious decision to pull the trigger, the massive recoil driving the weapon against her shoulder with enough force to shift her entire position. The round impacted somewhere in the dirt berm behind the target, its passage marked by a fountain of dust and debris that indicated a complete miss at a distance where missing should have been impossible. Emma quickly cycled the bolt and settled back into position, forcing herself to concentrate on the immediate task rather than the memories that threatened to overwhelm her focus. The second shot was closer, but still outside the scoring rings. And the third was worse than the first. After 10 minutes of shooting, her target looked like it had been attacked by someone who had never held a rifle before, with holes scattered across the backstop in a pattern that suggested fundamental problems with basic marksmanship skills. Around her, other Marines were achieving the kind of results expected from experienced shooters, adapting to a new weapon system. Tight groups near the center of their targets, minor adjustments to accommodate the Barrett's unique characteristics. The kind of steady progress that indicated successful adaptation to the training program's demands. Emma's performance stood out for all the wrong reasons, a level of inaccuracy that seemed impossible given her previous experience and reputation. Master Sergeant Torres approached her position with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense. He knelt beside her shooting mat and observed her next few shots, noting the technical precision of her shooting position, the correctness of her breathing and trigger control, and the complete disconnect between her obvious expertise and her inability to hit targets at distances she should have been able to manage with iron sights. "Sergeant Walsh," Torres said quietly, his voice pitched so that nearby Marines couldn't overhear the conversation, "I've reviewed your service record. Your previous qualification scores indicate expert-level marksmanship. What I'm seeing today doesn't match that history. Is there something affecting your performance that we should discuss?" Emma continued to stare through her rifle scope, crosshairs steady on the target center, even as she knew the next shot would miss by an unpredictable margin. Just need some time to adjust to the new weapon system, Master Sergeant. Different ballistics, different feel. I'll get it figured out. Torres studied her for a moment longer. Reading the subtle signs that suggested the problem was more complex than simple unfamiliarity with new equipment. He'd seen enough Marines struggle with various aspects of advanced training to recognize the difference between mechanical issues and psychological blocks. Emma Walsh was demonstrating the kind of disconnect between knowledge and performance that usually indicated trauma-related stress affecting combat veterans. Take your time, Sergeant. Torres replied, but his tone suggested that time might not be unlimited. This program moves fast, and we can't slow down for individual problems. If you need additional support, medical or otherwise, don't wait until it becomes a crisis. The afternoon session focused on longer-range shooting, with targets at distances where atmospheric conditions became significant factors in shot placement. Emma's performance continued to deteriorate. Her shots scattered across an increasingly wide area as the distances increased. What should have been a demonstration of advanced marksmanship skills became an exercise in public humiliation, with each missed shot confirming that something fundamental had changed in her relationship with precision shooting. That evening, Emma found herself alone in the armory, performing maintenance on the Barrett rifle that had defeated her so thoroughly during her first day of training. The weapon was mechanically perfect, its bore clean and its action smooth, its optics precisely zeroed for the ammunition she'd been using. Every technical aspect of the rifle was functioning exactly as designed, which meant the problem resided somewhere else entirely. She broke down the rifle's major components and reassembled them with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that had made her an expert armorer as well as a marksman. Her hands moved through the familiar routines without conscious direction, muscle memory guiding her through procedures she'd performed thousands of times. But even in the quiet sanctuary of the armory, she couldn't escape the reality that technical competence wasn't enough to overcome whatever psychological barriers had developed between her and her ability to shoot accurately. Private Lisa Thompson, a younger Marine from Emma's barracks, entered the armory carrying her own rifle case and observed Emma's methodical work with obvious curiosity. Thompson was new to the Marine Corps, but had demonstrated natural shooting ability during the day's training, achieving the kind of consistent results that suggested she might successfully complete the program. "That's beautiful work, Sergeant," Thompson said, nodding toward Emma's perfectly maintained rifle. "I've never seen anyone field strip a Barrett that quickly. You must have serious experience with these weapons." Emma looked up from her work, noting the genuine admiration in the younger Marine's voice. "Some experience," she replied quietly. "Different contexts, different requirements. The weapon doesn't change much, but everything else does." Thompson settled onto a nearby bench and began cleaning her own rifle, a standard M40A6 that looked small and simple compared to the massive Barrett system. "I heard you had some tough luck on the range today. Tomorrow's got to be better, right? I mean, with your background and decorations, this program should be routine for you." Emma paused in her reassembly process, considering how to respond to the kind of assumption that had been following her throughout her military career. Her decorations told a story of successful combat performance, but they didn't reveal the psychological cost of that success or the ongoing struggle to maintain her capabilities in the face of accumulated stress and unprocessed trauma. "Past performance doesn't guarantee future results," Emma said finally, resuming her work on the rifle. "Every day is a new test, and every test has different requirements. The only thing that matters is what happens when you're behind the trigger. And that can change for reasons that have nothing to do with training or experience." Thompson nodded thoughtfully, recognizing the wisdom in Emma's words, even if she couldn't fully understand their deeper meaning. The armory fell silent except for the familiar sounds of weapons maintenance, The subtle clicks and scrapes of metal components being cleaned and reassembled with practiced precision. Emma finished her work and secured the Barrett in its assigned rack, the weapon ready for another day of training that would test her ability to overcome the psychological barriers that had transformed her from an expert marksman into a struggling student. She knew that time was limited, that the program's pace wouldn't accommodate extended periods of poor performance, and that her military career might depend on her ability to rediscover skills that had once defined her professional identity. The desert night was surprisingly cool, a sharp contrast to the day's brutal heat that reminded Emma of other deserts and other places where she'd learned lessons about life and death that couldn't be taught in any training program. She stood outside the barracks and studied the star-filled sky, thinking about the path that had brought her to this point and wondering whether she had the strength to continue fighting battles that existed primarily in her own mind. Tomorrow would bring another day on the range, another opportunity to prove that she belonged in the advanced marksmanship program, another chance to demonstrate that her previous success had been based on genuine skill rather than luck or circumstances that no longer existed. But tonight, she allowed herself to acknowledge the fear that had been growing stronger with each passing day. The terrifying possibility that the Emma Walsh, who had once been an expert marksman, might be gone forever, replaced by someone who could remember being skilled but could no longer access those abilities when they mattered most. The whispers started during morning chow on her third day at Camp Pendleton. Emma noticed them first as a subtle shift in conversation patterns, the way Marines at nearby tables would lower their voices when she approached, then resume talking at normal volume after she passed. The mess hall carried sound in unpredictable ways, and fragments of discussion drifted across the dining area like smoke from a distant fire. Heard she's got more combat decorations than half the instructors combined, but can't hit water if she fell out of a boat. Corporal Jake Mitchell's voice carried just far enough to be audible, though his tone suggested he wasn't intentionally broadcasting his observations to the entire mess hall. Something doesn't add up about her story. Specialist Amy Carter nodded toward Emma's table without making her interest obvious. My buddy in admin said her file is thicker than most officers. 3 Purple Hearts, bronze stars with V devices, presidential unit citation. That's not the kind of record you build by accident or luck. Those decorations mean she's been in situations where people depend on your shooting to stay alive. Staff Sergeant David Brooks, who had been observing Emma's performance with the analytical attention of someone who understood the complexities of combat stress, stirred his coffee thoughtfully. Could be medical. Heard rumors about Marines coming back from deployment with problems that don't show up on physical examinations. Head injuries, psychological trauma, neurological issues that affect motor control. The Corps doesn't advertise it, but there's a whole infrastructure for dealing with Marines who come back changed. Emma continued eating her breakfast with mechanical precision, each bite chewed the same number of times, each sip of coffee measured to provide optimal caffeine intake without causing jitters that might affect her shooting. She could hear every word of their speculation, but her expression remained neutral, professional, revealing nothing of the turmoil their accurate guesses created in her chest. The conversation shifted to technical discussions about rifle maintenance and ammunition selection, safer topics that didn't involve psychological evaluation of fellow Marines. Emma finished her meal and cleared her tray, walking past their table with the same measured pace she maintained everywhere on base. No acknowledgement of their discussion, no defensive reactions, just the steady movement of someone who had learned to control external responses regardless of internal chaos. But Private Lisa Thompson, who had been watching Emma with increasing concern since their conversation in the armory, noticed the subtle changes in her behavior. The way Emma's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly when she heard her name mentioned. How her breathing shifted to the deeper, more controlled pattern that combat veterans used when managing stress. the slight adjustment in her posture that suggested preparation for action, even in the safe environment of the mess hall. Thompson caught up with Emma outside the dining facility, falling into step beside her without invitation or explanation. The younger Marine had grown up in a military family and recognized the signs of someone carrying weight they couldn't share with others. Her approach was casual but purposeful, the kind of gesture that offered support without demanding explanation. "Beautiful morning for shooting, don't you think, Sergeant?" Thompson's tone was conversational, but her eyes carried genuine concern. "Winds calm, temperatures perfect, visibility's unlimited. Should be ideal conditions for everyone to show what they can really do." Emma glanced at the younger Marine, recognizing the attempt at encouragement and appreciating it even while knowing that ideal conditions wouldn't solve her fundamental problems. Weather affects everyone equally, private. What matters is how. You adapt to whatever conditions you're given. Perfect days are rare in combat, so we train for imperfect situations. They walked toward the range complex in comfortable silence, two Marines from different generations and different experiences, finding common ground in their shared commitment to excellence in their profession. Thompson's presence was oddly comforting, a reminder that military service created bonds between people who might never have met in civilian life, but who understood each other's dedication to something larger than individual success. The range was already active when they arrived, with Marines from earlier training cycles, conducting advanced exercises at distances that tested the limits of their equipment and abilities. The sound of 50 caliber rifles firing carried across the desert like thunder, each report followed by the distinctive whine of massive bullets cutting through air at supersonic velocities. Electronic scoreboards displayed real-time results, with hit probabilities and group measurements that told the story of each shooter's performance with mathematical precision. Emma's assigned rifle waited on the equipment table, its surface already warm from the morning sun that would make metal components uncomfortable to handle within the next hour. The Barrett M82A1 represented nearly 40 pounds of steel, aluminum, and precision engineering designed to deliver half-inch diameter projectiles with enough accuracy to engage human targets at distances exceeding a mile. The weapon commanded respect from anyone who understood its capabilities, but Emma found herself approaching it with the same dread she might feel toward a wild animal that had already proven dangerous. Master Sergeant Torres gathered the day's training group around. A large whiteboard covered with ballistic charts and atmospheric data that would affect long-range shooting performance. His briefing covered the technical aspects of precision marksmanship with the thoroughness of someone who understood that incomplete knowledge could result in mission failure and casualties in operational environments. "Today we advance to 600 meters, Torres announced, his eyes scanning the assembled Marines with the calculating gaze of someone evaluating their readiness for increased challenge. At this distance, atmospheric conditions become significant factors in shot placement. Wind velocity and direction, air temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, and mirage effects must all be considered when calculating firing solutions. The mathematics of long-range shooting were complex enough to challenge Marines with college educations, involving trigonometric calculations that accounted for bullet drop, wind rift, and the Coriolis effect caused by the Earth's rotation. Emma understood the theory perfectly, could work through the calculations faster than most Marines in the program, and had successfully applied these principles in combat situations where mathematical errors meant American casualties. But understanding the science didn't translate to practical application when her hands betrayed her knowledge. The Barrett's massive scope provided crystal-clear images of targets that seemed impossibly small at 600 meters, but Emma found herself unable to maintain steady sight pictures for the extended periods required for precise shot placement. The crosshairs wavered unpredictably, following patterns that bore no relationship to her breathing or natural body movements. Her first shot of the day impacted in the dirt, approximately 3 feet to the right of her target, a miss so dramatic that other Marines paused in their own shooting to verify that she had been aiming at the correct target frame. The electronic scoring system registered no impact, its sensors unable to detect a bullet passage that had occurred entirely outside the target area. Emma cycled the Barrett's massive bolt, ejecting a spent cartridge case that cost more than most people spent on lunch, and settled back into her shooting position with grim determination. The second shot was worse, disappearing entirely into the desert without any visible impact point. The third round actually managed to hit her target frame, but so far outside the scoring rings that it barely qualified as intentional rather than accidental contact. Corporal Mitchell, shooting from the position beside her, was achieving the kind of consistent accuracy that demonstrated successful adaptation to the Barrett's unique characteristics. His shots formed tight groups near the center of his target, with minor variations that reflected normal precision shooting performance under field conditions. The contrast between his steady progress and Emma's complete inability to achieve measurable results became more obvious with each passing minute. "You might want to check your scope mounting," Mitchell suggested quietly, his tone carrying genuine concern rather than condescension. "Sometimes the recoil from these big rifles can loosen the optics mounting screws enough to throw off your point of impact. Seen it happen to Marines who know what they're doing, but can't figure out why their shots are going wild." Emma appreciated the suggestion even while knowing that her equipment wasn't the source of her problems. She spent the next few minutes examining her rifle's scope mounts, checking torque specifications and alignment with the kind of thoroughness that demonstrated her technical competence with precision weapon systems. Everything was mechanically perfect, properly tightened, correctly aligned, and precisely zeroed for the ammunition she was using. The problem existed somewhere between her knowledge and her ability to apply that knowledge under pressure. Every time she settled behind the rifle scope, her peripheral vision filled with shapes and movements that existed only in memory. The target downrange would shift and change, becoming something else entirely, transforming from a harmless piece of cardboard into a life-or-death decision that carried consequences she was still trying to understand. Specialist Carter, who had been observing Emma's struggles with increasing puzzlement, finally approached during a break in the shooting schedule. Her manner was professional but friendly, the approach of someone offering assistance rather than judgment. Carter's own target showed the kind of steady improvement expected from Marines adapting to advanced marksmanship training, with group sizes steadily decreasing as she learned to manage the Barrett's recoil and timing. "Sergeant Walsh, I've been watching your technique, and everything looks textbook perfect. Breathing, position, trigger control, follow through. But your impacts are scattered like you're using a different rifle than everyone else. Have you considered that maybe you're overthinking the shot process? Sometimes when Marines have extensive training, they start second-guessing instincts that used to work perfectly." Emma looked up from her rifle maintenance, recognizing the accuracy of Carter's observation while knowing that the solution wasn't as simple as stopping overthinking. The problem wasn't intellectual but visceral, a disconnect between conscious knowledge and unconscious reaction that seemed to worsen with each failed attempt to shoot accurately. "Appreciate the observation, specialist." Emma's response was measured, professional, revealing nothing of the frustration that threatened to overwhelm her composure. Sometimes advanced training creates bad habits that are hard to break. Takes time to unlearn incorrect techniques and reestablish proper fundamentals. But even as she spoke the words, Emma knew they weren't true. Her fundamentals remained solid. Her technique was flawless, and her understanding of marksmanship principles was more comprehensive than most Marines in the program. The problem existed at a deeper level, in the psychological space where conscious decisions intersected with unconscious reactions, where memory could override present reality with enough force to make accurate shooting impossible. The afternoon Session moved to practical exercises that simulated combat shooting scenarios, with targets appearing at random intervals and distances, requiring Marines to make rapid assessments and deliver accurate fire under time pressure. These exercises were designed to bridge the gap between static range shooting and the dynamic requirements of actual combat, where enemies didn't stand still and shooting positions were rarely ideal. Emma's performance in these scenarios was even worse than her static shooting, with missed shots and fumbled reloads that suggested fundamental problems with her stress management under pressure. Each failed engagement reinforced her growing conviction that something essential had been damaged in her relationship with precision shooting, something that might never be repaired regardless of training or practice. Staff Sergeant Brooks, who had been watching Emma's struggles with the analytical attention of someone who understood combat stress, finally approached her during a lull in the training schedule. His manner was casual but purposeful, the approach of someone offering professional insight rather than personal judgment. "Sergeant Walsh, mind if we talk for a minute?" Brooks's tone suggested this would be a professional conversation rather than a social interaction, which Emma found preferable to attempts at personal connection that might require her to reveal more about her situation than she was prepared to discuss. They walked away from the main group of Marines, finding a position where their conversation wouldn't be overheard by others who might misinterpret professional discussion as evidence of serious problems. Brooks had the kind of combat experience that gave his observations weight, and Emma found herself genuinely curious about his perspective on her performance issues. "I've seen Marines go through situations that changed their relationship with combat skills," Brooks began, his voice pitched low enough that their conversation remained private. "Sometimes the changes are temporary, stress reactions that resolve with time and proper support. Other times the changes are more fundamental, requiring different approaches to training and performance expectations." Emma studied his weathered features, recognizing the signs of someone who had seen enough combat to understand the complexities of military service beyond training manuals and theoretical scenarios. His approach was matter-of-fact rather than sympathetic, which she found more comfortable than attempts at emotional support that might trigger defensive reactions. "What kind of different approaches?" Emma asked, genuinely interested in his perspective on performance issues that seemed to resist conventional solutions. Brooks glanced toward the other Marines continuing their training exercises, ensuring their conversation remained private before responding. "Some Marines benefit from modified training schedules that reduce pressure and allow more time for skill rebuilding. Others need medical evaluation to rule out physical causes for performance changes. A few require complete breaks from combat-related activities, while they process experiences that might be affecting their current abilities." The suggestion of medical evaluation sent a chill through Emma's chest, raising the possibility of diagnoses that might end her military career or result in assignments that would effectively remove her from the profession she had devoted her adult life to mastering. Medical evaluations meant official documentation of problems, permanent records that would follow her throughout her remaining years of service, and potential limitations on her future assignments and advancement opportunities. "I appreciate the suggestions, Sergeant Brooks, but I think this is more about adjusting to new equipment than anything requiring medical intervention." Emma's response was carefully measured, professional, revealing nothing of the anxiety his suggestions had created. Sometimes it takes longer than expected to adapt to different weapon systems and training environments. Brooks nodded as if he had expected this response, recognizing the reluctance of experienced Marines to admit problems that might affect their professional standing. His expression suggested understanding rather than judgment, the reaction of someone who had probably faced similar decisions about seeking help versus trying to solve problems independently. "Just keep in mind that asking for support isn't a sign of weakness, especially when performance issues might affect not just your own success, but the safety of Marines who depend on your skills in operational environments. Brooks's tone remained matter-of-fact, but his words carried the weight of someone who understood the life-and-death implications of marksmanship failures in combat situations. Emma spent that evening in the base library, researching technical aspects of precision shooting that might explain her performance problems through mechanical rather than psychological causes. She studied ballistics tables, atmospheric data, and equipment specifications with the thoroughness of someone looking for objective solutions to subjective problems. The research was comprehensive, but ultimately unsatisfying, revealing nothing that could account for her dramatic deterioration in shooting ability. The library was quiet except for the soft sounds of other Marines studying various subjects related to their military education, from foreign languages to advanced mathematics to military history. Emma found the academic environment oddly comforting, a return to the intellectual challenges of formal learning rather than the visceral demands of combat skills that had begun to feel increasingly impossible. Private Thompson found her there, near closing time, carrying textbooks related to her own advanced education requirements. The younger Marine settled at Emma's table without invitation, recognizing the need for companionship even when conversation might not be welcome or necessary. "How's the research going, Sergeant?" Thompson's question was casual but carried genuine interest in Emma's welfare, the concern of someone who had recognized a fellow Marine in distress and wanted to offer whatever support might be helpful. Emma looked up from ballistics charts that had failed to provide the answers she sought, recognizing Thompson's sincere desire to help while knowing that the solutions to her problems couldn't be found in technical manuals or academic research. The younger Marine's presence was comforting without being intrusive, offering companionship without demanding explanation or emotional revelation. Learning a lot about the science of shooting, not finding much that helps with the practical application. Emma's response was honest without being specific, acknowledging her struggles without revealing details that might compromise her professional standing or Thompson's respect for her experience and capabilities. They studied in comfortable silence. For the remaining hour before the library closed, two Marines from different backgrounds, sharing space and mutual support without requiring conversation or explanation. Emma found Thompson's presence oddly reassuring, a reminder that military service created connections between people who understood the challenges of professional excellence, even when specific problems remained private. The walk back to the barracks took them past the illuminated rifle range, where night training exercises were continuing under artificial lighting that turned the desert landscape into something alien and theatrical. The sound of gunfire echoed across the base, a constant reminder of the training mission that defined every aspect of life at Camp Pendleton. Emma paused to watch the night shooters, Marines whose silhouettes moved with practiced precision as they engaged targets at distances that challenged both equipment and human capability. Their movements appeared confident and controlled, demonstrating the kind of expertise she had once possessed, but could no longer access when it mattered most. Tomorrow would bring another day of training, another opportunity to demonstrate competence. She no longer seemed to possess another test of abilities that had once defined her professional identity, but now seemed to slip further beyond her reach with each passing attempt. The Barrett M82A1 would be waiting, mechanically perfect and ready to reveal whether she could overcome whatever psychological barriers had developed between her knowledge and her performance. But tonight, walking across the darkened base with a fellow Marine who offered support without demanding explanation, Emma allowed herself to hope that solutions might still be possible, that the skills she had lost might somehow be recovered, and that her military career might survive the crisis that threatened to end everything she had worked to achieve over 8 years of devoted service to her country and her fellow Marines. The official notification arrived on Friday morning, delivered by a stone-faced administrative clerk who knocked on Emma's door at precisely 0530 hours. The envelope bore the official seal of the training command and the kind of formal weight that suggested career-altering contents. Emma signed for the document with steady hands, her expression betraying nothing of the dread that had been building in her chest since her performance failures had become impossible to ignore. Performance Evaluation Review, mandatory, the header. Read in bold military typeface. Staff Sergeant Emma R. Walsh is hereby notified that her current training performance has fallen below established minimum standards for continuation in the Advanced Marksmanship Program. Immediate remedial action required. Report to Master Sergeant Torres, Building 47, Room 204. Monday 0800 hours for formal assessment and determination of training status. Emma read the document twice, absorbing every word with the careful attention of someone whose career might depend on understanding the precise language of military bureaucracy. The terminology was diplomatically phrased but unmistakably clear. Her shooting performance was so far below acceptable standards that the program administration was considering her removal from training. Failure to complete the Advanced Marksmanship Program would effectively end her career as a precision shooter and likely result in reassignment to conventional infantry duties that would waste her specialized skills and experience. The weekend stretched ahead like an unwelcome break in routine. 48 hours of forced inactivity that would provide too much time for anxiety and self-doubt to flourish without the distraction of training activities. Emma spent Saturday morning in the base gymnasium, pushing her body through punishing physical training that exhausted her muscles while doing nothing to quiet the mental turmoil that had become her constant companion. The weight room was nearly empty at 0600 hours, populated only by the most dedicated Marines who preferred solitary training to the social dynamics of group fitness activities. Emma loaded the barbell with enough weight to demand complete concentration, finding temporary peace in the simple challenge of moving heavy objects through space according to precise biomechanical principles. Physical training had always been a refuge for her, a realm where effort produced predictable results and improvement could be measured objectively. But even the familiar comfort of strenuous exercise couldn't completely silence the voice in her head that questioned everything about her current situation. How had someone with her experience and decorations become unable to perform basic marksmanship skills? What had changed between her last deployment and her current training that could account for such a dramatic deterioration in abilities that had once defined her professional identity? Private Thompson appeared in the gymnasium doorway around 700 hours, carrying the same determined expression that had characterized her approach to every aspect of military training. The younger Marine had been watching Emma's struggles with increasing concern, recognizing signs of distress that reminded her of her father's difficult adjustment after his own combat deployments. Thompson's approach was casual but purposeful, the gesture of someone offering support without demanding explanation. "Mind if I work in, Sergeant?" Thompson's question was technically about sharing exercise equipment, but her tone suggested deeper concern for Emma's well-being. The younger Marine began her own workout routine, matching Emma's intensity while maintaining the kind of comfortable silence that allowed conversation to develop naturally without pressure. They trained together for nearly 2 hours, two Marines from different generations and backgrounds, finding common ground in their shared commitment to physical excellence. Thompson's presence was oddly comforting, a reminder that military service created bonds between people who understood each other's dedication to standards that civilian society rarely demanded or appreciated. "Beautiful morning for a run, don't you think?" Thompson suggested as they finished their weight training. "Perfect temperature, calm winds, and the desert looks spectacular when the sun hits it just right. Sometimes getting outside the base buildings helps clear my head when I'm working through complicated problems." Emma recognized the invitation for what it was, an opportunity to talk through issues that couldn't be addressed in the formal military. environment where every conversation might be overheard and misinterpreted. They changed into running gear and set out on one of the desert trails that wound through the hills surrounding Camp Pendleton, following a path that offered both physical challenge and privacy for discussions that required discretion. The trail climbed steadily through terrain that showcased the harsh beauty of Southern California desert landscape. Sagebrush and cacti dotted the hillsides, while distant mountains created a backdrop that reminded Emma of other deserts and other countries where she had learned lessons about survival and decision-making that couldn't be taught in any classroom. The physical exertion of running uphill demanded enough attention to quiet the mental noise that had been plaguing her for weeks. "You know, Sergeant, my father went through something similar after his third deployment to Iraq." Thompson's voice carried easily over the sound of their footsteps on the rocky trail. He'd been a squad leader, expert marksman, the kind of Marine everyone respected and depended on. But when he came back that last time, something had changed. He couldn't shoot worth a damn anymore, couldn't make decisions under pressure, couldn't sleep through the night without waking up in a cold sweat. Emma maintained her running pace while absorbing Thompson's revelation, recognizing the younger Marine's attempt to share relevant experience without directly addressing Emma's situation. The approach was tactful and respectful, offering insight without demanding reciprocal confession or emotional disclosure. "What happened to him?" Emma asked, genuinely curious about the resolution of Thompson's father's struggles and wondering whether his experience might provide clues about her own situation. "Took him almost 2 years to figure out that the problem wasn't physical, but psychological." Thompson's breathing remained steady despite the challenging terrain and pace they were maintaining. He'd seen things, done things, made decisions that saved American lives but cost him something he hadn't realized he was losing. "The Corps has resources for Marines dealing with combat stress, but you have to be willing to ask for help. And that's harder for some people than others." They ran in silence for several minutes, both Marines processing the implications of Thompson's story while navigating the increasingly technical terrain that required attention to foot placement and balance. The desert air was clean and cool. In the early morning hours, carrying scents of sage and dust that reminded Emma of the therapeutic value of physical activity in natural environments. Did he ever get back to full-duty status? Emma's question revealed more about her own concerns than she had intended, suggesting that she was considering the possibility that her problems might require professional intervention rather than self-directed solutions. "Better than full duty," Thompson replied with obvious pride in her father's recovery. "Took some time, took some help from people who understood combat stress, but he eventually became one of the best instructors the Corps had. Turns out that going through the struggle and coming out the other side made him better at helping other Marines who were dealing with similar issues. Sometimes your worst experiences become your greatest strengths, if you're willing to work through them honestly." Emma absorbed this information while maintaining her running pace, considering the possibility that her current struggles might eventually lead to something positive rather than simply representing the end of her career as a precision shooter. The concept was both hopeful and terrifying, suggesting that recovery might be possible while requiring her to acknowledge the depth of her current problems. The trail reached its highest point at a scenic overlook that provided panoramic views of the surrounding desert and distant Pacific Ocean. They stopped to rest and hydrate, taking advantage of the spectacular scenery while catching their breath. From the challenging climb, the physical exertion had cleared Emma's mind enough to allow more objective consideration of her situation and options. "I appreciate you sharing your father's story, Private." Emma's tone was formal but carried genuine gratitude for Thompson's attempt to provide helpful perspective. It's useful to know that performance issues don't necessarily mean career endings, especially when they're related to experiences rather than lack of ability or commitment. Thompson nodded while studying the desert landscape stretching toward the horizon. The thing my father learned was that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of intelligence. Smart Marines use every available resource to accomplish their missions, whether that's equipment, training, or support from people who understand their situation. The run back to base was faster and easier, following the same trail downhill with gravity assisting their pace. Emma found herself feeling more optimistic than she had in weeks, not because her shooting problems had been solved, but because Thompson's story suggested that solutions might exist beyond her current understanding. The possibility that her struggles might be temporary rather than permanent opened mental space for hope that had been absent since her performance issues had begun. Sunday evening brought the kind of quiet reflection that preceded important decisions. Emma sat in the base chapel, not from religious motivation, but because the space offered peace and privacy for the kind of deep thinking that required freedom from distractions. The building was empty except for her, its simple architecture and soft lighting creating an atmosphere conducive to honest self-assessment. She had spent 8 years building a military career based on precision shooting and combat leadership, accumulating decorations and experience that should have guaranteed her success in any marksmanship program the Marine Corps could design. But success in the past didn't guarantee success in the present, especially when psychological factors had begun to interfere with physical skills that had once seemed automatic and reliable. The Barrett M82A1 rifle represented more than just advanced military equipment. It symbolized the pinnacle of precision marksmanship and access to assignments that could define the remainder of her military career. Failure to qualify with the weapon would effectively limit her future opportunities and might force her to choose between accepting reduced responsibilities or leaving the military entirely. But perhaps more importantly, her shooting problems represented a disconnect from the professional identity that had sustained her through deployments, training programs, and personal challenges that had tested every aspect of her character and capability. Without her skills as a marksman, she would need to discover who she was as a Marine and as a person, a process that might require acknowledging weaknesses she had never been willing to confront. Monday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that followed nights of genuine rest and honest self-reflection. Emma dressed in her service uniform, ensuring every detail met the exacting standards expected for formal military meetings. The walk to Building 47 took her past the rifle range where other Marines were beginning their daily training, the sound of gunfire serving as a reminder of the skills she needed to recover if she wanted to continue her career as a precision shooter. Master Sergeant Torres was waiting in his office when Emma arrived at precisely 0800 hours, his expression serious but not unsympathetic. The room was Spartan and functional, decorated only with certificates, photographs, and awards. That documented Torres's extensive experience as a marksmanship instructor and combat veteran. His desk held Emma's training file, thick with performance reports and evaluation documents that told the story of her recent struggles in objective, measurable terms. "Sergeant Walsh, please have a seat." Torres's tone was professional and matter-of-fact, suggesting that this would be a business meeting rather than a counseling session or disciplinary action. "Your performance over the past 3 weeks has been significantly below the standards required for successful completion of this program. I need to understand whether this represents a temporary adjustment period or a more fundamental change in your capabilities." Emma settled into the indicated chair, maintaining perfect military bearing, while internally preparing for a conversation that might determine the direction of her remaining military career. She had spent years in similar meetings where performance was evaluated and career decisions were made, but this was the first time she had been on the defensive side of such discussions. "Master Sergeant, my shooting performance has been unacceptable, and I take full responsibility for failing to meet program standards." Emma's response was direct and professional, acknowledging her problems without making excuses or attempting to shift blame to external factors. "I believe the issues are temporary. and can be corrected with appropriate adjustments to my training approach. Torres studied her for several moments, reading body language and tone with the expertise of someone who had evaluated hundreds of Marines facing various types of performance challenges. His expression suggested genuine concern rather than administrative irritation, the response of an instructor who wanted to help students succeed rather than simply documenting their failures. Sergeant Walsh, your service record indicates exceptional marksmanship ability demonstrated consistently over multiple deployments and training programs. The disconnect between your documented capabilities and your current performance suggests factors beyond simple skill degradation or equipment familiarization issues. Torres's voice carried the authority of experience combined with genuine concern for Emma's welfare. He opened her file and reviewed specific performance metrics that documented the severity of her shooting problems in objective, measurable terms. At 400 meters, your average group size is currently 3 times larger than program minimums. At 600 meters, your hit probability has been consistently below acceptable thresholds. These aren't minor adjustments to new equipment. They represent fundamental changes in your shooting ability. Emma listened to the recitation of her failures with the stoic acceptance of someone who had already acknowledged the reality of her situation. The numbers were worse than she had hoped, but not surprising given her subjective experience of complete inability to control her shooting performance, despite technical knowledge and proper equipment. I understand the severity of the performance gap, Master Sergeant. Emma's response remained professional despite the discomfort of having her failures documented so precisely. I'm requesting additional time and modified training approaches that might help me identify and correct whatever factors are affecting my shooting ability. Torres leaned back in his chair, considering options that might salvage Emma's participation in the program while maintaining the standards that ensured only qualified Marines received advanced marksmanship certification. His expression suggested sympathy for her situation, balanced against responsibility for program integrity and the safety of Marines who might depend on her skills in operational environments. Sergeant Walsh, I'm willing to authorize a 2-week remedial training period with modified instruction methods and reduced performance pressure. Torres's tone carried both hope and caution. However, this extension requires your agreement to participate in comprehensive evaluation that might include medical and psychological assessment to identify any factors affecting your performance. The mention of psychological assessment sent a familiar chill through Emma's chest, raising concerns about official documentation of mental health issues that might follow her throughout her remaining military career. But the alternative was immediate removal from the program and effective end of her career as a precision shooter, a consequence that might be even more damaging to her long-term prospects. I accept the terms of the remedial training period and agree to participate in comprehensive evaluation as required. Emma's response was immediate and decisive, recognizing that this represented her best opportunity to recover her shooting abilities and continue her military career in the field she had devoted years to mastering. Torres made notes in her file, while explaining the modified training schedule that would begin the following day. The approach would focus on fundamental skill rebuilding, with emphasis on stress reduction and confidence restoration rather than immediate performance at advanced levels. Emma would work with specialized instructors experienced in helping Marines overcome various types of performance barriers. The meeting concluded with handshakes and mutual expressions of hope for successful resolution of Emma's shooting problems. Torres's manner suggested genuine optimism that appropriate support and modified training methods might help her recover abilities that had been temporarily affected by factors yet to be fully understood or addressed. Emma left Building 47 feeling both relieved and apprehensive about the path ahead. The remedial training period represented hope for recovery, while the required evaluations raised concerns about potential discoveries that might prove more damaging than her current shooting. Problems. But she had committed to the process and would pursue every available resource to recover the skills that had once defined her professional identity and career prospects. The afternoon was free from scheduled training, providing time for Emma to prepare mentally and physically for the intensive remedial program that would begin the following day. She spent several hours in the base library, researching performance psychology and stress management, techniques that might supplement the formal instruction she would receive from specialized trainers. The research revealed a complex body of knowledge about factors that could affect skilled performance under pressure, from physiological stress responses to psychological blocks that developed following traumatic experiences. Emma found herself particularly interested in studies of military personnel who had experienced performance degradation following combat deployments, recognizing patterns that seemed relevant to her own situation. As evening approached, Emma returned to her barracks to find Private Thompson waiting with obvious concern about the outcome of the formal evaluation meeting. The younger Marine's presence was comforting without being intrusive, offering support and companionship during a period when Emma's future remained uncertain and potentially dependent on her ability to overcome problems that had proven resistant to conventional solutions. "How did the meeting go, Sergeant?" Thompson's question was direct but carried genuine care for Emma's welfare rather than simple curiosity about military administrative processes. Emma considered how much information she should share while maintaining appropriate professional boundaries and protecting her own privacy during a vulnerable period. Thompson had demonstrated trustworthiness and genuine concern, making her a valuable source of support during the challenging weeks ahead. "They're giving me another chance with modified training methods and comprehensive evaluation to identify whatever's affecting my shooting performance." Emma's response was honest without being specific about the psychological assessment requirements that made her most uncomfortable. 2 weeks to prove that this is a temporary problem rather than a permanent change in my capabilities. Thompson nodded with obvious relief that Emma's career wasn't ending immediately, while recognizing that the next 2 weeks would be crucial for determining whether recovery was possible through available military resources and support systems. The younger Marine's expression suggested confidence in Emma's ability to overcome her current struggles, a faith that Emma found both touching and terrifying given the stakes involved. "That's great news, Sergeant. I have a good feeling about this. Sometimes when you've been trying to solve problems the same way over and over, a completely different approach is exactly what's needed to break through whatever barriers have developed." Emma hoped Thompson's optimism would prove justified, while recognizing that hope alone wouldn't be sufficient to overcome whatever psychological or physiological factors had transformed her from an expert marksman into someone who couldn't hit targets at distances she had once dominated with casual precision. The next 2 weeks would reveal whether her military career could survive the crisis that had brought everything she had worked to achieve into question. The black government sedans appeared on the horizon like heat mirages materializing into reality, their approach marked by dust clouds that rose from the desert road in perfect formation. Emma noticed them first during her modified training session, pausing in her dry fire practice to watch 3 identical vehicles navigate the winding access road to Camp Pendleton's advanced marksmanship training facility. Unlike the usual military convoys that thundered through the main gate with diesel engines and canvas-covered cargo beds, these vehicles moved with the quiet authority of people who didn't need to announce their importance. The sedans were immaculate despite the dusty desert environment, their black paint reflecting the California sun in sheets of polished light that suggested government maintenance standards far exceeding normal military vehicle care. Tinted windows concealed their occupants while projecting the kind of official mystery that made seasoned Marines pause in their activities to watch and speculate about the nature of unannounced visits from people whose identities remained carefully concealed. Master Sergeant Torres noticed the convoy's approach from his position in the range control tower, lowering his binoculars with the expression of someone whose routine day was about to become significantly more complicated. Official visits usually came with advance notice, formal protocols, and carefully scripted agendas that allowed training personnel to prepare for inspection or evaluation. Unannounced arrivals suggested either emergency situations or the presence of authorities whose schedules took precedence over normal military courtesy. Emma continued her remedial training exercises while tracking the vehicle's progress through her peripheral vision, noting their route toward the administrative complex, rather than the training ranges where most official visitors would expect to observe active instruction. Her modified training schedule had been producing marginal improvements in her shooting consistency, but nothing approaching the level of performance required for successful program completion. Each day brought incremental progress measured in smaller group sizes and fewer complete misses, but the fundamental disconnect between her knowledge and practical application remained stubbornly persistent. The Sodans rolled through the main checkpoint without the usual delays associated with security screening, their occupants apparently possessing credentials that eliminated normal verification procedures. Emma watched the lead vehicle's passenger door open to reveal a figure whose bearing immediately commanded attention, even at a distance of several hundred meters. The man who emerged moved with the kind of controlled precision that marked career military officers, but his civilian attire and the deference shown by accompanying personnel suggested authority that transcended normal command structures. Admiral James Blackwood stood exactly 6 feet 2 inches tall, with the kind of weathered complexion that came from decades of exposure to salt air and tropical sun. His silver hair was cut to regulation standards despite his civilian clothes, and his posture carried the unconscious authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of lives and millions of dollars in military resources. Even without uniform insignia to announce his rank, his presence created a subtle shift in the behavior of nearby Marines who recognized leadership when they encountered it. The Admiral's eyes moved constantly, cataloging details of the training facility with the automatic assessment of someone whose survival had once depended on rapid evaluation of tactical situations. He noted the positions of key buildings, the fields of fire available from various vantage points, and the general state of readiness that characterized active military installations. But his attention focused most intently on the rifle ranges, where Marines were conducting advanced marksmanship, training under conditions that simulated the challenges of operational environments. Emma felt a chill of recognition despite never having seen Admiral Blackwood before, his presence triggering memories of other senior officials who had appeared in her previous assignments during moments of crisis or transition. High-ranking military officers rarely visited training facilities without specific purposes related to performance issues, policy changes, or situations requiring their direct intervention. His arrival suggested that her remedial training period had attracted attention at levels far above the local command structure. The Admiral's conversation with Master Sergeant Torres lasted nearly 30 minutes, conducted in the privacy of the range control tower, where their discussion couldn't be overheard by curious Marines who had noted the unusual nature of his visit. Emma continued her shooting exercises while observing their interaction through her rifle scope, noting body language and gestures that suggested serious discussion about matters requiring careful consideration and potential policy decisions. When Torres and Admiral Blackwood emerged from their private meeting, both men were expressions of professional concern mixed with determination to address whatever situation had brought such high-level attention to the advanced marksmanship training facility. The Admiral's gaze swept across the training ranges before settling on Emma's position with the kind of focused attention that suggested she was the specific reason for his unannounced visit. Staff Sergeant Walsh, report to the range control tower immediately. Torres's voice carried across the desert with amplified authority, his tone suggesting official business rather than routine training instruction. Emma secured her weapon and equipment with practiced efficiency, her movements betraying none of the anxiety that Admiral Blackwood's presence had created in her chest. The walk to the control tower provided time for Emma to speculate about the nature of Admiral Blackwood's interest in her situation while maintaining the composed exterior that had carried her through 8 years of military service. High-ranking officers didn't travel hundreds of miles to observe remedial training unless circumstances warranted their personal involvement in situations that couldn't be resolved through normal military channels. Admiral Blackwood was waiting in the tower's observation area when Emma arrived. His attention focused on the shooting ranges below, where Marines continued their training exercises with increased intensity that suggested awareness of official scrutiny. His civilian clothes were expensive but practical, designed for comfort and durability rather than fashion, suggesting someone whose lifestyle required clothing suitable for various environments and activities. Staff Sergeant Walsh, I'm Admiral Blackwood. I've been following your situation through official channels, and I requested permission to observe your training personally. His voice carried the kind of quiet authority that made formal military courtesies seem unnecessary while commanding absolute attention and respect. Emma stood at attention despite the informal setting, recognizing the Admiral's rank and experience, even without visible insignia to announce his status. Yes, sir. She kept her response brief and professional, avoiding speculation about his reasons for personal involvement in her remedial training program. The Admiral gestured toward the observation windows that provided panoramic views of the entire training complex, his movements economical and purposeful in the manner of someone accustomed to making efficient use of available time. I understand you've been experiencing difficulty with precision shooting, despite having an exceptional combat record and previous marksmanship achievements. Emma maintained her military bearing while considering how to respond to direct questioning from someone whose authority clearly exceeded local command structures. Her performance problems had apparently attracted attention at levels she hadn't anticipated, suggesting implications beyond her individual career that might affect program policies or evaluation procedures. Yes, sir. My shooting performance has fallen below program standards, and I'm currently participating in remedial training to identify and correct whatever factors are affecting my marksmanship abilities. Emma's response was factual, without revealing the psychological aspects of her situation that might compromise her professional standing. Admiral Blackwood nodded as if her response confirmed information he'd already received through other sources, his expression suggesting familiarity with performance issues that transcended simple technical problems or equipment unfamiliarity. His presence indicated official interest in her situation that went beyond routine training administration, raising questions about why someone of his rank would personally involve himself in individual Marine personnel matters. Sergeant Walsh, I've reviewed your service record extensively, including classified operation reports and performance evaluations that paint a picture of exceptional marksmanship ability demonstrated under extremely challenging conditions. Admiral Blackwood's tone carried genuine respect for her documented achievements, while acknowledging the contrast with her current struggles. He paused to study the Marines' training on the ranges below, noting their techniques and comparing their performance to standards he had observed throughout his career in various military specialties. Your combat decorations represent life and death situations where your shooting skills saved American lives and contributed to mission success in environments where failure would have had strategic consequences. Emma felt uncomfortable with praise for past achievements that seemed increasingly irrelevant to her current inability to perform basic marksmanship tasks, but she maintained professional composure while waiting for Admiral Blackwood to explain the purpose of his visit and personal interest in her training situation. Master Sergeant Torres has briefed me on your remedial training progress and the comprehensive evaluation procedures designed to identify factors affecting your performance. Admiral Blackwood's tone became more serious, suggesting transition to the primary purpose of his visit. However, I believe your situation requires a different approach than conventional training modification and psychological assessment. The Admiral's statement created a mixture of hope and apprehension in Emma's mind, suggesting alternative solutions while raising questions about what unconventional approaches he might have in mind for addressing her shooting problems. His involvement clearly indicated resources and options beyond those available through normal military training channels. I'd like to observe your shooting performance personally, using standard program protocols and equipment to verify the scope of the performance issues described in your training reports. Admiral Blackwood's request was phrased politely but carried the authority of someone whose suggestions were actually commands requiring compliance regardless of personal preferences. Emma felt her stomach tighten at the prospect of demonstrating her shooting failures for someone of Admiral Blackwood's stature and experience, but she recognized that refusing his request would be neither possible nor advisable given his obvious authority and interest in her situation. "Yes, sir. I'm available for evaluation at your convenience." Emma's response was professional despite her internal anxiety about performing under increased scrutiny from someone whose opinion might affect not only her current training but her entire military career. Torres arranged for the demonstration on Range 7, the facility's primary precision shooting course that featured targets at distances ranging from 600 to 1,200 meters, under conditions that tested both equipment capabilities and shooter expertise. The Barrett M82A1 rifle was prepared according to standard procedures, with premium match-grade ammunition that eliminated equipment variables from performance evaluation. Emma approached her assigned shooting position with the same methodical preparation she had maintained throughout her remedial training period, checking equipment and environmental conditions with practiced thoroughness despite the additional pressure created by Admiral Blackwood's presence. The rifle felt familiar, but remained the source of consistent frustration that had characterized her training experience since arriving at Camp Pendleton. Other Marines training on adjacent ranges had noticed the official attention focused on Emma's position, creating an atmosphere of heightened awareness that made her demonstration more public than she would have preferred. Conversations quieted as word spread about the Admiral's presence and his apparent interest in observing Emma's shooting performance personally. The first target was positioned at 800 meters, a distance that should have been routine for someone with Emma's documented expertise and the Barrett's exceptional accuracy capabilities. She settled into her shooting position with textbook precision, adjusting the rifle's bipod and scope settings, while controlling her breathing and heart rate through techniques that had become automatic during years of precision shooting training. But as she acquired her sight picture and prepared to engage the target, familiar psychological barriers reasserted themselves with renewed intensity. The crosshairs wavered unpredictably despite her stable shooting position, and the target began to shift and change in ways that had nothing to do with atmospheric conditions or equipment problems. Her trigger finger found its familiar position, but refused to apply the steady pressure required for accurate shot placement. Admiral Blackwood observed her preparation and hesitation with the analytical attention of someone who understood the complexities of precision shooting under pressure, noting technical aspects of her performance while recognizing signs of internal struggle that couldn't be addressed through conventional training methods. Minutes passed while Emma fought against psychological blocks that prevented her from completing the shot sequence, her technical competence rendered useless by mental barriers that seemed to strengthen rather than weaken with increased effort. To overcome them, the demonstration was becoming another public failure that would confirm her inability to perform skills that had once defined her professional identity. That's when Admiral Blackwood stepped forward into her peripheral vision, his movement deliberate and purposeful in a way that commanded immediate attention despite her focus on the target downrange. His presence created a shift in the psychological atmosphere that had been dominating her shooting attempts throughout her training period. Staff Sergeant Walsh. Admiral Blackwood's voice cut through the desert air, with quiet authority that demanded response while offering something that sounded almost like understanding rather than judgment. Emma shifted her attention toward him. Without abandoning her shooting position, recognizing command authority while maintaining readiness to continue the demonstration if required. The Admiral's expression had changed from official observation to something more personal, suggesting recognition of factors affecting her performance that went beyond simple technical evaluation. Kandahar Province, 2019. Operation Resolute Guardian. Admiral Blackwood's words struck Emma like physical blows, invoking memories of classified operations that shouldn't have been part of any official record, accessible to personnel outside her direct chain of command. The mention of specific dates and operation names triggered immediate recognition of the deployment where her shooting problems had originated. The assignment where decisions made under extreme pressure had created psychological wounds that were still affecting her performance years later. Admiral Blackwood's knowledge of these details suggested access to information that went far beyond routine training records. You were positioned on Overwatch, covering the withdrawal of a reconnaissance team that had been compromised during a time-sensitive intelligence-gathering mission. Admiral Blackwood continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had access to operational reports that remained classified above Emma's security clearance level. Emma's hands began to shake almost imperceptibly as Admiral Blackwood recounted details of the mission that had changed everything about her relationship with precision shooting, the operation where split-second decisions had saved American lives, while creating psychological barriers that were still affecting her years later. 3 insurgents were using civilian cover to approach the extraction point, where the reconnaissance team was waiting for helicopter support. You had clear shots on all 3 targets, but civilian presence complicated the engagement geometry and created risk of collateral damage. The target downrange began to blur as Admiral Blackwood's words transported Emma back to that dusty rooftop in Afghanistan, where she had been forced to make decisions that would haunt her long after the mission was complete. The memory was so vivid that the California training range seemed to dissolve around her, replaced by the sights, sounds, and smells of a combat environment where hesitation could result in American casualties. You took the shots that needed to be taken, neutralizing the threat and allowing the reconnaissance team to reach the extraction point safely. Admiral Blackwood's tone carried absolute certainty about the correctness of her actions, despite the psychological cost they had extracted. But one of your rounds passed within inches of a civilian who had been caught in the engagement area through no fault of his own. No injury, no casualties, perfect mission execution that saved American lives and achieved operational objectives. Emma felt something shift in her chest as Admiral Blackwood acknowledged both the success of her actions and the psychological weight they had created, recognizing the complexity of combat decisions that civilian society would never understand or appreciate. Since that mission, you've been second-guessing every shot, questioning decisions that saved lives, allowing what-if scenarios to interfere with skills that were developed through years of training and combat experience. Admiral Blackwood's assessment was delivered with the precision of someone who understood both the technical and psychological aspects of precision shooting under extreme pressure. The Admiral raised his right hand in a gesture that commanded immediate attention, his movement deliberate and ceremonial in a way that suggested significant meaning beyond its simple appearance. His expression had shifted from official evaluation to personal recognition of sacrifice and service that deserved acknowledgement rather than criticism. Staff Sergeant Walsh. Admiral Blackwood's voice carried the weight of absolute authority, combined with genuine respect for her service and sacrifice. That mission saved 12 American lives and prevented the compromise of intelligence assets that were critical to ongoing operations throughout the theater. Emma felt tears forming in her eyes despite her efforts to maintain military composure. The combination of official recognition and personal understanding creating an emotional release that years of therapy and self-examination had failed to achieve. Your shooting that day was perfect. Your decisions were correct. Your performance under extreme pressure represented the highest standards of military marksmanship and tactical judgment. Admiral Blackwood continued, his tone carrying the authority of someone whose opinion could officially close the psychological chapter that had been affecting her performance. He paused to let his words fully register before delivering the statement that would change everything about Emma's relationship with precision shooting and her understanding of her own capabilities and worth as a Marine. If you think one close call negates 12 lives saved, you're not honoring those Marines who came home to their families because of your skill and courage. Admiral Blackwood's voice carried the kind of absolute certainty that cut through years of self-doubt and psychological barriers with surgical precision. The most important shot you'll ever take is the next one. Not the last one, not the perfect one, but the one that's needed right now. Something fundamental shifted in Emma's understanding of herself and her capabilities as Admiral. Blackwood's words reframed her combat experience in terms of success rather than psychological burden. The weight she had been carrying for years didn't disappear, but it transformed from crushing guilt into manageable responsibility for using her skills to prevent future casualties. The Barrett M82A1 suddenly felt different in her hands, no longer a weapon that might cause unintended harm, but a tool for protecting American lives in situations where precision and courage were the difference between success and tragedy. Her breathing steadied automatically, and the target downrange came into sharp focus for the first time in months. Emma's first shot struck the center of the target with mechanical precision, the massive rifle's recoil absorbed by her properly positioned body without affecting her concentration or follow-through. The electronic scoring system registered a perfect hit, confirming what everyone on the range could see through binoculars and spotting scopes. What followed was a display of marksmanship that reminded everyone present why Emma Walsh had earned her reputation as one of the Marine Corps' most effective precision shooters. Target after target fell to precisely placed rounds that demonstrated mastery of the Barrett's capabilities and the complex calculations required for accurate shooting at extended ranges. At 1,000 meters, she achieved group sizes that challenged the mechanical accuracy limits of the rifle and ammunition combination. At 1,200 meters, she engaged moving targets with shot placement that would have been considered exceptional under ideal conditions, much less during a high-pressure demonstration with official observers evaluating every aspect of her performance. Other Marines on adjacent ranges had stopped their own training to watch Emma's shooting demonstration, recognizing the kind of expert marksmanship that few people ever witness in person. The sound of .50 caliber rounds cracking through the desert air became a rhythmic testament to recovered skills and restored confidence. Master Sergeant Torres recorded group measurements and hit probabilities that would establish new facility records for Barrett M82A1 accuracy, documentation that would remain posted on the range bulletin board as evidence of what was possible when expert training met exceptional natural ability. But the most significant change wasn't in Emma's shooting statistics, but in her demeanor and self-confidence, the restoration of professional identity that had been damaged by years of self-doubt and unprocessed guilt about decisions made under impossible circumstances. When the demonstration concluded and Emma secured her weapon according to range safety protocols, she stood and faced Admiral Blackwood with the bearing of someone who had rediscovered essential aspects of her character and capabilities that had been temporarily obscured by psychological barriers. "Thank you, sir." Emma's words were simple but carried profound gratitude for intervention that had accomplished in minutes what months of conventional therapy and training modification had failed to achieve. Admiral Blackwood nodded with the satisfaction of someone whose understanding of combat psychology had enabled him to provide precisely the kind of support that Emma needed to overcome her performance barriers and restore her effectiveness as a precision shooter. The Marine Corps invested years and considerable resources in developing your skills. Sergeant Walsh, we have a responsibility to help you use those skills effectively, not just for your own career success, but for the safety of Marines who may depend on your capabilities in future operations. Emma's transition from struggling student to expert instructor happened with the kind of institutional efficiency that characterized military organizations when they functioned properly. Within a week of her breakthrough demonstration, she had been reassigned from student status to assistant instructor duties that utilized her restored shooting abilities while providing advanced training opportunities for other Marines. Her first teaching assignment involved working with Marines who were experiencing their own performance difficulties, sharing insights about the psychological aspects of precision shooting that couldn't be found in technical manuals or conventional training programs. Emma discovered that her experience with combat stress and performance barriers made her particularly effective at helping other Marines overcome similar problems. The Barrett M82A1 became her primary teaching tool, a weapon that had once represented everything she feared about her own capabilities, but now symbolized the recovery and professional growth that were possible when proper support was provided by people who understood the complexities of military service and combat stress. Marines in her classes responded to instruction from someone who had personally experienced and overcome the challenges they were facing, recognizing authenticity that couldn't be faked or learned from textbooks alone. Emma's teaching combined technical expertise with psychological understanding that helped students develop both marksmanship skills and the mental resilience required for success under pressure. Her evening routine included maintenance of the training facility's Barrett rifles, ensuring that the weapons remained in perfect condition for the demanding accuracy requirements of advanced marksmanship training. The familiar ritual of cleaning and adjusting precision equipment provided satisfaction that connected her current teaching responsibilities with years of operational experience. But the most significant change in Emma's life was the restoration of confidence in her own judgment and capabilities, the recovery of professional identity that had been damaged by unprocessed guilt about decisions made during combat operations. Admiral Blackwood's intervention had provided official recognition that her actions had been correct and necessary, allowing her to move forward without the psychological burden that had been affecting every aspect of her performance. 6 months later, Emma received orders to report to Marine Corps Scout Sniper School as a primary instructor, a position that would utilize her advanced marksmanship skills while providing career advancement, opportunities that had seemed impossible during her darkest period of self-doubt and performance problems. The assignment represented full recognition of her recovered capabilities and growing reputation as an instructor who could help Marines overcome various types of performance barriers. Through combination of technical expertise and psychological understanding gained through personal experience with combat stress, Admiral Blackwood attended her graduation ceremony from the Advanced Marksmanship Training Facility, presenting her with commendations that officially recognized her transformation from struggling student to exceptional instructor while acknowledging the courage required to seek help and work through problems that many Marines prefer to handle independently. During their final conversation, Admiral Blackwood shared his own experience with combat stress and the importance of military leaders who understand that seeking help is a sign of strength rather than weakness, especially when performance issues might affect the safety and success of other Marines in operational environments. Emma's story became part of the unofficial curriculum at advanced marksmanship programs throughout the Marine Corps, not as an example of failure and recovery, but as proof that even the most skilled Marines can benefit from proper support when facing challenges that exceed individual capability to resolve independently. Her students learned technical marksmanship skills alongside lessons about the importance of mental resilience, proper stress management, and the courage required to ask for help when needed. Emma's teaching combined precision shooting instruction with broader education about military service, leadership, and the responsibility that experienced Marines have to support their colleagues during difficult periods. The Barrett M82A1 remained her favorite weapon system, not because of its technical capabilities, but because it represented everything she had almost lost and ultimately recovered through combination of personal courage, proper support, and official recognition that her service and sacrifice deserved respect rather than self-criticism. Years later, when younger Marines asked about the secret to expert marksmanship, Emma would tell them that the most important shot is always the next one. Not the last one or the perfect one, but the one that's needed right now. Technical skills can be taught and equipment can be improved, but the confidence to take necessary action when lives depend on your capabilities comes from understanding that past mistakes don't define future potential, especially when those mistakes were actually correct decisions made under impossible circumstances. Part 15. The Barrett Story Epilogue. The Barrett M82A1 felt different in Emma's hands now. Not like the unforgiving adversary it had been for months, but like an extension of her will and purpose. 3 years had passed since Admiral Blackwood's intervention transformed her from a struggling student into one of the Marine Corps' most sought-after marksmanship instructors. The weapon that had once betrayed her at every critical moment now responded to her touch with mechanical precision that bordered on the supernatural. Emma stood at the edge of Range 12 at Quantico, Virginia, watching a new class of Marines attempt their first qualification with the .50 caliber system. The autumn air was crisp and clear, perfect conditions for precision shooting that eliminated atmospheric variables from the complex equation of long-range marksmanship. But perfect weather couldn't eliminate the psychological barriers that separated competent shooters from true marksmen, the invisible obstacles that had once nearly ended her own career. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera was having the kind of day Emma remembered too well. His shooting position was textbook perfect, his breathing controlled, his trigger technique flawless according to every manual the Marine Corps had ever published. But his shots were scattering across the target face like he was firing at random, each miss more frustrating than the last. Emma recognized the signs immediately. Technical competence at war with psychological interference, knowledge rendered useless by mental barriers that conventional training couldn't address. Rivera had arrived at the Advanced Marksmanship School with credentials that should have guaranteed success. 2 combat deployments, expert marksmanship badges, glowing recommendations from commanding officers who praised his tactical skills, and leadership potential. But credentials meant nothing when your mind refused to cooperate with your training. When memories interfered with muscle memory in ways that made precision shooting feel impossible despite years of successful performance. Emma approached Rivera's position with the careful timing she had learned during her own teaching evolution. Too early, and struggling Marines would become defensive about their performance. Too late, and frustration would solidify into self-doubt. That became increasingly difficult to overcome. The key was recognizing the precise moment when a student was ready to accept help without feeling judged or criticized. Having some trouble finding your rhythm today, Sergeant Rivera? Emma's question was casual but carried the authority of someone who had seen every possible variation of marksmanship problems and understood their underlying causes. Rivera looked up from his rifle with the expression of someone who had been trying to solve an impossible puzzle for hours without making measurable progress. His face showed the kind of controlled frustration that experienced Marines displayed when their competence was being challenged by factors they couldn't identify or control. "Ma'am, I can't figure out what's wrong. Everything feels right when I'm setting up the shot, but something happens between aiming and firing that throws everything off." It's like my brain forgets how to shoot the moment I decide to pull the trigger. Emma settled onto the shooting mat beside Rivera, noting the technical perfection of his equipment setup and shooting position while recognizing signs of the psychological interference that had once plagued her own performance. The Barrett was mechanically perfect, properly zeroed, equipped with premium optics that provided crystal-clear target resolution. The problem existed in the space between knowledge and application, where conscious thought could become the enemy of automatic response. Tell me about your last deployment, Sergeant Rivera. Emma's question seemed unrelated to marksmanship training, but her tone suggested purpose behind the inquiry that went beyond casual conversation. Rivera's expression shifted slightly, indicating that Emma's question had touched on subjects he preferred not to discuss in professional settings. His body language became more guarded, the defensive posture of someone who had learned to protect sensitive information, even when sharing might be beneficial. Standard infantry operations in Syria, ma'am. Nothing out of the ordinary for Marines in that theater. We did our job and brought everyone home safely. But Emma recognized the carefully neutral language that combat veterans used when describing experiences that had affected them more deeply than they were willing to admit. She had used similar deflection techniques during her own period of performance. Problems, protecting psychological wounds while pretending that professional competence remained unaffected by personal trauma. Any situations where split-second decisions determined life or death outcomes. Emma's follow-up question was more specific, designed to explore whether Rivera's shooting problems might be connected to combat experiences that had created psychological barriers similar to those she had overcome. Rivera was quiet for several moments, apparently considering how much information he was willing to share with an instructor who seemed genuinely interested in helping him rather than simply evaluating his performance according to program standards. There was one incident where I had to make a judgment call about engaging targets in a populated area. Everything worked out fine, no civilian casualties, mission accomplished according to plan. But sometimes I think about how different things could have been if I'd made different decisions. Emma recognized the pattern immediately. Successful combat performance, shadowed by what-if scenarios that created doubt about future decision-making capabilities. Rivera was experiencing the same psychological interference that had transformed her from expert marksman into struggling student. The same mental barriers that made precision shooting feel impossible despite technical competence. Sergeant Rivera, that kind of thinking is exactly what's affecting your shooting performance. You're not missing targets because your skills have deteriorated. You're missing because you're second-guessing decisions before you make them, allowing doubt to interfere with training that should be automatic. Emma's assessment was delivered with the authority of someone who had personal experience with the problems Rivera was facing, combined with professional expertise gained through years of helping Marines overcome similar psychological barriers. What you did in Syria saved American lives and accomplished mission objectives under conditions where mistakes would have had strategic consequences. The fact that you're still thinking about potential alternative outcomes shows you understand the weight of responsibility, but it's preventing you from applying skills that proved effective when they were needed most. Rivera listened with obvious interest, recognizing accuracy in Emma's analysis that conventional marksmanship instruction had failed to provide. His expression suggested relief that someone understood the complexity of his situation rather than simply documenting his failure to meet performance standards. How do I stop second-guessing myself, ma'am? Rivera's question carried genuine desperation from someone whose professional identity was being threatened by problems he couldn't solve through conventional approaches. Emma considered her response carefully, drawing on both personal experience and professional training to provide guidance that might help Rivera overcome barriers that had once seemed insurmountable to her own recovery. You start by recognizing that the most important shot is the next one, not the last one or the perfect one, but the one that's needed right now. Past decisions can inform current judgment, but they can't be allowed to paralyze future action when lives depend on your capabilities. She gestured toward the Barrett rifle that had been defeating Rivera's best efforts throughout the morning. Training session. That weapon doesn't care about your doubts or your memories. It responds to technique, consistency, and controlled application of fundamentals. Your job is to provide those inputs without allowing psychological interference. To disrupt the process, Emma demonstrated the shooting sequence with deliberate precision, settling into position behind Rivera's rifle and engaging distant targets with shot placement that would have been impressive under ideal conditions, much less during an impromptu instructional demonstration. Her movements were fluid and automatic, demonstrating the kind of unconscious competence that Rivera had once possessed but seemed unable to access. Watch how my breathing doesn't change between target acquisition and shot execution. Emma's instruction focused on practical techniques rather than psychological theory. My trigger finger finds the same position for every shot, regardless of target distance or environmental conditions. The mechanics remain constant because they work, and they work because they're based on proven principles rather than situational variables. Rivera observed Emma's demonstration with the concentrated attention of someone recognizing expertise that he wanted to emulate and recover in his own performance. Her shooting was technically perfect, but also appeared effortless, the result of training so thoroughly integrated that conscious thought became unnecessary during execution. Now you try it, but this time I want you to focus only on your breathing and trigger control. Don't think about the target. Don't calculate wind. Drift. Don't worry about group size or scoring rings. Just breathe, aim, and squeeze. Rivera settled back into his shooting position with renewed focus, attempting to apply Emma's guidance while suppressing the analytical thinking that had been interfering with his automatic responses. His first shot struck closer to the target, center than any of his previous attempts, indicating that psychological pressure had indeed been the primary factor affecting his accuracy. Better, much better. Emma's encouragement was genuine but measured, recognizing improvement while avoiding excessive praise that might create pressure to maintain performance, levels that weren't yet consistently achievable. Keep building on that foundation. Trust your training and let your experience guide your actions. Over the next hour, Rivera's shooting steadily improved as Emma continued providing guidance that addressed both technical aspects of marksmanship and psychological factors that could interfere with skilled performance under pressure. His group sizes decreased and his confidence increased with each successful engagement, creating positive feedback that reinforced correct technique and mental approach. By the end of the session, Rivera was achieving the kind of consistent accuracy that demonstrated successful adaptation to the Barrett's characteristics and successful management of whatever psychological barriers had been affecting his performance. His expression showed relief combined with renewed confidence in his own capabilities. "Thank you, ma'am. I don't know what you did, but whatever was messing with my shooting seems to have cleared up." Rivera's gratitude was obvious and heartfelt, the response of someone whose professional crisis had been resolved through intervention that conventional training hadn't provided. Emma packed her equipment while considering how to explain the recovery process in terms that Rivera could understand and apply to future challenges that might affect his performance in similar ways. What happened today wasn't magic, Sergeant Rivera. It was recognition that technical skills and psychological readiness are equally important for consistent performance under pressure. You never lost your shooting ability. You just needed permission to trust it again. Emma's explanation emphasized practical aspects of performance psychology, rather than theoretical concepts that might seem abstract or irrelevant to operational requirements. Marine training focused on actionable solutions rather than academic analysis, and her instruction reflected that practical orientation. The afternoon brought Emma's advanced instructor certification class, a group of experienced Marines who were preparing to teach precision marksmanship throughout the corps, These students already possessed expert-level shooting skills and were learning how to transfer those capabilities to other Marines who might be facing various types of performance challenges. Today we're going to discuss psychological factors that can affect marksmanship performance, particularly among Marines who have combat experience that might create mental barriers to consistent shooting accuracy. Emma began her instruction with the same matter-of-fact tone she used for technical subjects, treating psychological readiness as another measurable variable in the complex equation of precision shooting. The class included Marines from various military occupational specialties and deployment backgrounds, creating diverse perspectives on the relationship between combat experience and training performance. Some students had observed psychological barriers in Marines they had attempted to train, while others had experienced similar problems personally but hadn't understood their underlying causes. Combat stress can manifest in many ways, but one of the most common effects on precision shooters is second-guessing that interferes with automatic responses developed through years of training. Emma's explanation drew on both personal experience and professional research to provide comprehensive understanding of factors that conventional marksmanship training rarely addressed. She used case studies to illustrate various types of psychological interference, from performance anxiety that affected motor control to traumatic memories that disrupted concentration during critical moments. Each example included practical techniques for helping affected Marines overcome their barriers and recover their shooting capabilities. The key to helping Marines with these issues is recognizing that their technical skills usually remain intact. The problem exists in the psychological space where conscious thought intersects with unconscious response. Emma's instruction emphasized assessment techniques that could identify psychological barriers, rather than assuming that poor shooting performance indicated inadequate training or natural limitations. Students practiced diagnostic techniques, using role-playing scenarios that simulated various types of performance problems they might encounter when training other Marines. Emma evaluated their approaches and provided feedback that would help them recognize and address psychological factors that conventional instruction methods couldn't resolve. One student, Gunnery Sergeant Patricia Coleman, shared her experience working with a Marine whose shooting had deteriorated following a deployment where he had been forced to engage targets in populated areas with limited time for positive identification. The situation was similar to Rivera's case, but had resulted in different symptoms that required modified approaches. The Marine in question had developed a tendency to hesitate during target engagement, taking excessive time to verify target identification even when dealing with clearly marked training targets that pose no risk of civilian casualties. His technical skills remained excellent, but his decision-making process had been affected by combat experience that made him overly cautious about engagement decisions. Coleman had tried conventional remedial training approaches without success, focusing on technical instruction and practice that failed to address the underlying psychological factors affecting the Marine's performance. Her experience illustrated the importance of understanding root causes rather than simply treating observable symptoms. In cases like that, you need to help the Marine distinguish between operational requirements and training environments. Emma's guidance addressed the specific situation Coleman had described while providing general principles that could be applied to similar cases. Training scenarios should include specific emphasis on target identification protocols and rules of engagement that clarify when hesitation is appropriate versus when immediate action is required. The goal is helping Marines develop confidence in their judgment while maintaining appropriate caution in situations where civilian safety might be affected. Emma demonstrated training techniques that could help Marines overcome excessive caution without compromising safety awareness, using progressive exercises that built confidence in decision-making capabilities while reinforcing proper procedures for target identification and engagement authorization. The class concluded with practical exercises where students applied psychological assessment and intervention techniques to simulated marksmanship problems, developing skills that would make them more effective instructors when dealing with Marines who needed more than conventional technical training. Emma's evening routine included maintenance of the training facility's Barrett rifles, ensuring that the weapons remained in perfect condition for the demanding accuracy requirements of advanced marksmanship instruction. The familiar ritual of cleaning and adjusting precision equipment provided satisfaction that connected her current teaching responsibilities with years of operational experience and personal recovery. But the most significant aspect of Emma's daily routine was the knowledge that her work was helping other Marines overcome challenges similar to those that had once threatened to end her own career. Each successful student represented validation that her experience had been transformed from personal crisis into professional capability that could benefit others facing similar struggles. Her apartment near the Quantico training facility was decorated with mementos from her teaching career, rather than her combat deployments, reflecting a conscious choice to focus on current contributions rather than past achievements. Photographs showed groups of successful students, letters of appreciation from Marines whose careers had been saved through her intervention, and official recognition of her contributions to marksmanship training throughout the Marine Corps. The Barrett M82A1 had become a symbol of recovery and professional growth rather than the source of frustration it had once represented. Emma's relationship with the weapon reflected broader changes in her understanding of herself and her capabilities, demonstrating that even the most challenging obstacles could be overcome through proper support and persistent effort. 3 years after Admiral Blackwood's intervention had saved her career, Emma had established herself as one of the Marine Corps' most effective marksmanship instructors, with a reputation for helping Marines overcome psychological barriers that conventional training couldn't address. Her success validated the importance of understanding that technical competence and psychological readiness were equally critical for consistent performance under pressure. Marines throughout the Corps knew Emma's story, not as an example of failure in recovery, but as proof that seeking help was a sign of professional maturity rather than personal weakness. Her experience demonstrated that even expert performers could benefit from proper support when facing challenges that exceeded individual capability to resolve independently. The legacy Emma was building through her teaching extended far beyond marksmanship instruction to encompass broader lessons about resilience, professional development, and the importance of military communities that supported their members during difficult periods. Her work proved that personal struggles could be transformed into professional strengths when approached with courage, honesty, and proper support from people who understood the complexities of military service. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.